The vulnerable population I will be discussing today are those with eating disorders. Eating disorders occur when a preoccupation with food, weight, and appearance disturb emotions, thoughts, and healthy eating behaviors. This can result in serious or fatal illness. Types of eating disorders include anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder. Anorexia nervosa is when people see themselves as overweight even when they are severely underweight. Some practices include restricting food, excessive exercise, use of vomiting or laxatives, and frequent weight taking. Bulimia nervosa involves a lack of control, leading to frequent episodes of eating large amounts of food. After the binge eating episodes, a person will try to compensate for the consumption of large amounts of food by vomiting, use of laxatives or diuretics, or periods of fasting. Those suffering with bulimia nervosa may be slightly underweight, normal weight, or overweight. Binge eating disorder, unlike anorexia and bulimia, is not followed by compensation for periods of uncontrolled eating. Those that suffer from this disorder are often overweight or obese. Binge eating disorder is the most common eating disorder in the U.S., as stated by the National Institute of Mental Health. Because of the stigma of those suffering with eating disorders as looking a certain way, this disorder is often overlooked or treated the wrong way, which leads us into the causes of health disparities in this population. Some health disparity causes are lack of perceived need for treatment, failure of the clinician to recognize and make diagnosis or referral, lack of treatment resources for some individuals, predisposed ideas of who develops eating disorders, and feelings of shame and isolation, which are felt by those who suffer from this disorder. In an article by Sonneville and Lipson, it states that because biases are consistent that eating disorders are a female condition, men were significantly less likely than women to seek help for their condition. They also discovered that compared with women, men were more likely to experience hospitalization for eating or weight-related concerns. It is possible that because of the reduced help seeking in men, this contributed to greater medical severity and subsequent need for acute medical and psychiatric care. Statewide, 4% of females, 1.4% of males in grades 9 through 12 in Utah public schools suffer from eating disorders. Nationwide, 30 million people suffer. 0.6% of American adults suffer from anorexia, 1% of American adults suffer from bulimia, and 2.8% suffer from binge eating disorder. Worldwide, 70 million people suffer from eating disorders. And because I was unable to find statistics on all those suffering from eating disorders in Utah, not only adolescents, I was unable to compare the statistics locally versus nationally. And over here on the right are some more statistics in eating disorders in men versus women, eating disorders in children and teens, and eating disorders among students. Some social determinants of health that affect this population are healthcare access and quality, more specifically, access to a primary care physician and regular appointments, equal care and detection from physicians, access to mental health care, and social and community context, more specifically, having a trusted source of support, adolescents having an adult to talk to about serious problems, increased resilience to challenges and stress. Having these resources can significantly increase and improve treatments, options, and outcomes. Some specific concerns that disproportionately affect this population fall under the psychosocial and physical categories. Under psychosocial, isolation, shame, low self-esteem, distress, guilt, and obsessive behaviors often occur. Under the physical concerns, for anorexia, lethargy, malnutrition, low blood pressure, slowed breathing, and heart rate. anemia, muscle wasting, constipation, damage to the heart, brain damage, multi-organ failure, and infertility. For bulimia, inflamed and sore throat, swollen glands and neck, acid reflux, GI distress, dehydration, and electrolyte imbalance. And for binge eating, obesity and the related comorbidities that follow. Some root causes that increase this population's vulnerability consist of feelings of isolation, fear, and shame. Oftentimes, those that suffer from these disorders have low self-esteem, fear of being judged or looked at differently, and feel judgments of society. Generalization about eating disorders and stereotypical appearance of eating disorders also is a root cause of the vulnerability of this population. Oftentimes, those with eating disorders are thought to be thin, white young girls who do this to themselves so that they can stay thin. People oftentimes do not consider the other races, genders, sizes, and ages that deal with eating disorders. And because of this, erasing those other populations that struggle deny equal opportunities for treatment and success. Identifying needs met and unmet for this population was kind of tricky. Under the needs that are met is listed breathing, sex, sleep, security of employment and property, friendship, and family. Although those with eating disorders may have these needs met, oftentimes depending on the severity of the disorder, these things can often be strained or unmet. For example, sleep oftentimes is disturbed due to results of the disorder. Another example could be sex. It may be hard to have intimate relations with those when your self-esteem is low and you don't feel good about your body. And some results of the disorder could decrease employment stability, and relationships with family and friends are often strained with those who suffer from these disorders. Things that are unmet are food, water, homeostasis, excretion, security of body, morality and health, self-esteem, confidence, respect, spontaneity, acceptance of facts, lack of prejudice, and creativity. So because of all of these unmet needs, the anticipated function of this population is moderate to low functioning and quality of life, and that's depending on the severity of the disorder and the mental health of the person affected. Likely health outcomes are usually poor physical and mental health. Because of the nutritional deprivation in this population, it often causes immunodeficiency, and this leads to the increased frequency and severity of infections or diseases. One interesting study by Nova et al. Did find that those with anorexia nervosa and bulimia have some compensation of the immune system and can often sustain from serious or frequent infections for a period of time. But in general, this population does have an increased susceptibility to communicable diseases and infections. As far as non-communicable diseases or infections, Matheson et al. States that persons with bulimia nervosa or binge eating disorder have an increased risk of non-communicable diseases. And some of these can include, with anorexia, anemia, hypotension, bradycardia, amenorrhea, cardiac disease, and kidney disease. Bulimia nervosa, these can include acid reflux and gastrointestinal disorders. In binge eating disorder, These can consist of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and asthma, and these are secondary to obesity that occurs from this disorder. The only way to prevent these non-communicable diseases would be early detection and treatment of the disorder, and a way to manage these conditions after they have occurred would be continued treatment, mental health care, and good support systems. With this population, they have many self-care deficits. With the practices that occur in this population, it would appear that they have good self-care habits such as exercise and eating healthy or clean eating, but these self-care behaviors are done to the extreme and counteract the health benefits that one might think that they are gaining. In this population, there is an increase of self-harm. Disorders that are associated with self-harm are often experienced by those with eating disorders, and those are mood disorders, depression, and substance abuse disorders. A large portion of those with bulimia nervosa are more susceptible to engage in self-harm. Those that fall under this category are oftentimes unable to cope with difficult emotions. Many of these people experience intense emotions and therefore have impulsive reactions to deal with these emotions. And as far as suicide, 1 in 5 deaths of those diagnosed with anorexia nervosa were a result of suicide. And those with eating disorders have an elevated risk of both suicide and suicide attempts. This chart was found on the Utah Department of Health website and shows further statistics of depression and suicide for those adolescents in Utah facing eating disorders. This vulnerable population does have an increased risk for harm by others. On the Utah Department of Health website, it states that 33.2% of students with potential eating disorders reported being bullied on school property, compared to 21.5% of students with no potential disorder. It was also found that there was a drastically higher rate of physical and sexual violence by a dating partner for students with potential eating disorders. And this can be the result of the feelings of shame and low self-esteem felt by those suffering with this disorder. As far as risk for harm to others by this population, there was no information that found a connection between eating disorders and the risk for harming others. In conclusion, I have found that this population's vulnerability is increased due to stigmas, shame, and effects of the disorder. To decrease the risk for health disparities in this population, we must change mindsets and biases pertaining to eating disorders and educate ourselves and others on the causes and treatment options for those suffering with any form of this disorder.